I'm 90.
All right.
Zippin was a big deal in topology
You're
back
90?
in the 50s or 60s.
Yes, yeah.
Zippin.
Right, so now.
I was at Chicago when I was undergraduate,
Uh-huh.
so I kind of, it was in the early sixties.
So do you have a narrow specialty within topology?
It was really the simplest, they called it point set topology, it was the simplest.
Okay,
And these days, I don't know if anyone does anything, I've been told by Kern Math, no, it's okay.
So did you know any of the physicists at Maryland?
The math library overlooked their accelerator that they built there, the
Mhm.
round thing there, as a graduate student at the University of Maryland. It's where I did my PhD.
So my specialty was cosmic radiation, and the chairman of the physics department at Maryland was also in that same field, but I can't remember his name. Back in the 60s.
so,
Anyway, maybe.
yeah, okay, we will come back to that a little bit later. But
Okay,
at any rate, let's get started now on our program. So you are joining us here for Science and Religion here at Temple Amos Israel in beautiful Sag Harbor. Unfortunately, Rabbi Dan is not feeling well. He can't join us tonight. But as we like to say around here, the show must go on. So we are going to be going on with Dr. Steve Rosen, who is right here next to me. And so if you read your emails, and I know you all do avidly, you know that we're going to be looking at this idea of, is science Jewish? Or more specifically, is Einstein's relativity Jewish? But we're also going to flash forward later to see what's going to be happening with science and religion in the future. But first, I want to introduce my friend, my favorite physicist. Well, I just realized my daughter-in-law's a physicist too. Uh-oh.
Uh-oh.
One of my favorite physicists. Dr. Steve Rosen, who is also the guy, along with his beautiful wife Celia, who doesn't want to be on camera, which is kind of a shame because she's delightful and beautiful.
Say
They
hello.
made this program possible, and it's been really a joy. So Steve has done this program before. I've told you before. He's worked at Los Alamos. He's worked at the Institut d'Astrophysique in Paris. He's an author, an artist, an educator, a bon vivant, and a funny guy. He is, so I think we should just dive into our topic. I know Steve has prepared something to kind of kick us off.
Thank you, Julie. Wonderful introduction. I will try to live up to it. As Lyndon Johnson said, my father would have loved it, and my mother would have believed it. So I want to start by talking about Einstein and Jewishness. We've got a few more people coming in.
Let's see.
Yeah.
Hi.
Welcome. Hi, come on in.
We're hard, we sort of have some folks on Zoom as well.
Okay, we're just starting, and we're gonna be talking about Einstein and Jewishness and their overlap. So the question, we put up the first slide.
Yeah. One
So
more.
here's the question of the evening. Is Einstein's science Jewish? There it is.
That's real.
Okay, so the answer is yes and no. Any questions? The answer is yes and no, because as you will see in a few moments as I talk about this, that there are good points on both sides. And furthermore, the fact that it's yes and no definitely means that it's Jewish. Because Jews like to disagree on the one hand, but on the other hand, and in fact, Orthodox people have told me that it's even Jewish and recommended to question the existence of God in Orthodox Judaism. I think that's a very interesting idea, because not many religions encourage you to disagree with the premise. So let's move into the next slide, please. And I want to point out that Catholicism was not good for science. All you have to do is think about Galileo. The 17th century revolution in science was inseparable from theological wrangling. Isaac Newton and all the other well-accomplished scientists in that time were all Protestants who negated the infallibility of the church. So the church was not good for science. And now I'm going to read to you a quote. In the same way that one's relationship with the divine need no longer be mediated through the church, the blueprints of God's creation were freed from the grip of the church and open to scientific investigations by anyone. So Judaism is a good religion for science because scientists also like to argue about yes and no. Let's go on to the next slide. Next slide.
Yep.
So, okay, so here's a test for everybody here and those at home. I'm going to read to you these two quotes. I'm going to ask you who said them, and I'm going to tell you the answer. Jews are a group of people unto themselves. You can see their Jewishness in their appearance and notice their Jewish heritage in their intellectual work. They perceive a profound connection between their nature and the numerous interpretations they give to that which they think and feel in the same way. Does anybody have a thought about who might have said something like that? The answer is Albert Einstein said that. And he's recognizing his own Jewishness, and he's characterizing Jews as a group unto ourselves. We all know that already, of course, but that's nice that he said that. The second quote I'm going to read and ask you who said it. Science, once the greatest pride of our people, today is taught by those whose science is nothing but a means by which our national soul is being systematically poisoned and thereby bringing about the collapse of the core of our culture. Any guesses? The answer is Hitler. Adolf Hitler said that. Hitler was not just an anti-Semite, he was a passionate anti-Semite, and he wanted Einstein dead. He actually put out a contract on his life, which Einstein fortunately escaped by coming to the United States in 1932 and spending the rest of his life at the Institute for Advanced Study. I learned relativity from one of Einstein's friends. Einstein died in 55. His friend and colleague and co-author named Professor Banish Hoffman told wonderful stories about Einstein and working with Einstein at the Institute for Advanced Study. I'll tell you one of them he told me. He used to sit in Einstein's office next to Einstein, and they would stare at these equations of general relativity, which are very, very complicated. There are 10 interlinked nonlinear differential equations describing the relationship between gravity and the curvature of space. So Einstein would get stuck, according to Banish, and when he got stuck, he said he would stand up, pace the floor, and twist his hair. He had a long hair. And he would pace the floor and say, I will a little think. And after a few moments of pacing and twisting his hair, he'd say, aha, I know what we have to do. We have to make an approximation. He sat down and they made the approximation and they moved past the difficulty. After Einstein died, Banish said when he was working on the same equations by himself, when he would get stuck, he would get up, he would pace the floor. He had very short hair. He would pace the floor and think and think. He said, but it never worked. Let's go on to the next slide. So here are three premises. One, there is a particularly Jewish style of thinking, which is the rabbinic method of interpreting sacred texts from multiple viewpoints. I'll say more about this in a moment. Two, this style of thinking influenced the content of the theory of relativity. And three, this influence is malicious, tainting the theory. This is Adolf Hitler talking. Now, a very interesting professor of philosophy said, well, you know, maybe Hitler was onto something. Maybe there is something. When Hitler said the influence is malicious, he was speaking as an anti-Semite. But those two premises above that has nothing to do with anti-Semitism. And Hitler, this professor, Stephen Gimble said, well, maybe Einstein, let's turn it on its head. What is there Jewish about Einstein and his relativity? And we know Einstein was born Jewish. When he was 12, he went through about a year of very serious Judaism, which he left thereafter. To him, Baruch Spinoza was the guy. He said, Spinoza's God is my God. Now, this is a sidebar. Spinoza believed that the 5 books of Moses were written by humans, not handed down by God. This was heresy in the 17th century, and he was excommunicated by the Jewish congregation in Amsterdam. And the second thing he said was, God is everywhere. God is nature. Now, strangely enough, those two ideas, which were heresy in the 17th century, are more or less accepted by a lot of, not everyone, but a lot of Reformed synagogues today. And I think if you talk to most people, you'll find they more or less agree with those ideas. So let's look at the first 2 premises and drop off the third one, because that's bad, Hitler being really bad and anti-Semitic. And let's go on to the next slide. Yeah, please. Okay, so now we're going to talk about different vantage points. This is a diagram that's used to explain general relativity. It's a very simple diagram to explain a pretty complicated topic. And I'm going to first note that there are 2 vantage points here. This is Einstein's thinking. The guy on the left is in a rocket that's accelerating upward. And the guy on the right is in a rocket that's at rest on a planet. So here's Einstein's genius observation. He said there is no experiment that either one of these people can do that would that would tell them that they're in different objects. Everything that happens in one of them happens in the other. So that, for example, if a beam of light enters that hole on the left side of the left rocket, in the short time that it takes the light to traverse to the right-hand side of that rocket, the rocket will have moved and the light will fall on a place on the right side of that rocket that's slightly below, because of the upward movement during the transit time, that's slightly below where it entered. Now, if these 2 things are equivalent to the different observers, different vantage points, then it must mean that gravitation bends light, which is a genius insight, a brilliant observation. And this supports the idea of different vantage points being a kind of a Jewish thing. And the next slide, this is general relativity. The next slide, this is special relativity. I'm not going to go into the details here, but this is a diagram used to explain special relativity and the fact that the speed of light is constant for all observers. On the left, there's a stationary observer on the Earth, and on the right, there's a moving observer. The point, again, being that there are 2 vantage points in special relativity as well as in general relativity. The next slide, please. So I made a little chart here. Relativity on the left, Jewish study on the right. Special relativity, 2 frames of reference. Jewish study, it's called Chavruta. Jews, Orthodox Jews, study in the Hebrew school in pairs. And the purpose of studying in pairs is so each can, they study the same text, but each one comes at the text from a different vantage point, and so they disagree, and they argue, and they fight with each other. Jews love to disagree, and challenging anything in Judaism is well respected and regarded. That's very unusual in a religion. So then on the left, in general relativity, I just showed you that there are 2 frames of reference, and on the right, the same thing holds true. So the next slide is shows a bunch of chubby Hebrew school students studying in pairs and disagreeing with each other. So disagreement is good in Judaism, and it's great in science. Scientists are always disagreeing with each other and challenging each other to support their point of view. It's a little bit like politics, I guess. So the next slide, here's our conclusion. Physics occupies a special place in the cultural imagination. Are we the center of the universe, or is the universe stranger than we can? My answer to that is yes. Yes and yes. The liberation Einstein represents is partly Jewish liberation. A member of an ancient people, Einstein created a new future, a new world, a new understanding of the universe. And by the way, Tikkun Olam is all about repairing the world and repairing ourselves. But you really have to understand the universe before you can repair it. So I think that's a Jewish idea as well, and a scientific idea. The next point is very important. The theory of relativity is important to Jews because it is not Jewish. It is the human ability to develop objective truths. And I think Jews really feel that very, very importantly. So is Einstein's relativity Jewish? Yes and no. And that's what makes it Jewish. And I think that's it.
That's.
Is there another thought? Okay, now, I want you to ask questions. There's no such thing as a dumb question, and please feel free.
Why don't you give the citation for the material that,
Oh,
because people
oh,
might wanna look at
now
the.
you want to ask me some questions?
Well, you covered a lot of what we had discussed previously.
Yeah, but there's some loose
Yes,
ends.
there certainly are.
Why did I?
So, okay, so I think you came in a little bit afterwards for our folks who are here at the temple with us. Steve and Celia actually created this program of science and religion here at Temple Adas Israel, and we've had all these wonderful speakers. But I'd love for you to basically, first of all, to me, science and religion are like polar opposites, you know, science is facts, religion is faith. What made you think, did you think this dialogue between science and religion was gonna be adversarial or come to some sort of a new harmony? What was your
Well,
goal?
that's a great question.
Mm.
No, I thought the opposite. So we have a lot of interesting congregants who had dialogues in this program with Dan. One of them is a psychiatrist, and he talked about dreams from the point of view of modern psychiatry. And then Dan spoke about dreams from the point of view of sacred texts, 7 lean years, 7 fat years. So after each of them presented their points of view, they started having a dialogue, not a debate, a dialogue, a conversation about the different points of view. And they were able to find areas of overlap. They came to some interesting, I can't remember what they were, but I spoke about cosmology from the physics point of view, and Dan spoke about cosmology from the Jewish Talmudic point of view, and we came to common ground afterwards. So these were not debates, and I like the idea. Dan talks about science being the truth in facts, and religion being the truth in values. And there are truths and values and human values that Jews have asserted and maintained and expanded upon for centuries and centuries. And I'm very proud to be Jewish because I like being Jewish. I like the ideas that Judaism challenges us with. So I forgot what I was gonna say next. Does anybody
One
have?
question. You know, I don't think science is fact and religion is faith, because you ever hear the book, The Tao of Physics?
Yes,
Have you read that?
I haven't, but I heard it.
You gotta read it. It's incredible. I read it as a
Is
kid
it a
and I
unified?
reread it. Well, They have quotes in there from very learned religious people from all religions about the universe. And then quotes from theoretical physicists, and there is no way
Wow.
you can tell who's who.
Yeah.
I think when you
That's
study something to its extreme, to the limits of what we can study, they're arriving at the same spot, kind of like if you go forever in the universe, you end up maybe where you started.
Right,
So I think, you know, if you, like, for example, you have to accept all these crazy things about the universe that don't make sense, right?
well, I mean, who
Like,
thought about the Big
Heisenberg
Bang?
uncertainty, where an electron for me could be in Pluto somewhere, right? Or, you know what I mean?
Well, science is very strange, I mean, the idea of a
When
Big
you
Bang-
extend it out, when you get beyond sort of, you know, your typical Newtonian, when you get to this quantum theory relativity, how can time change? That you can prove it, right? With the clock experiment that was flying up high and all that.
Mhm.
and quantum mechanics is also very strange.
But you can prove it, right? In a cyclotron, you have a particle that's supposed to live a second, but if you speed it up near the speed of light, it lives from our perspective long at exactly what
That's
they
correct.
predict.
That's
Mm.
correct.
I mean, all these, there's ways that we can actually prove now. I saw a movie showing light as it traversed like a glass and projected on the wall. They actually filmed fast enough to see the light go.
Wow.
You know, it's not instantaneous, so
Yeah.
I loved your talk and I.
So
think
what,
it's-
thank you, what kind of work do you do?
Oh, I'm a skin laser doctor, so I study photonics like light.
We
Laser
met
light,
you, we
sunlight.
met you at Janet Cross.
Yes, you
Now
did.
I remember.
Listen, man, you were so fascinating, nothing was keeping us away. We even brought our daughter in from Greece to here.
Well-
That's lovely.
And the other, I have one more question, I don't want, does anyone
No,
have
no,
questions?
no, you're,
Right, also, just to interject, if anyone on the Zoom wants to ask a question, if you put it in the chat, I think I can figure out how to read it and get that answered for
I
you.
don't wanna ask. you
yeah,
that.
down below in the chat
Yeah.
bar, in the bottom bar, there's a space for chat, and if you click on that, you can ask a question. Okay,
So
so,
you had another.
In the meantime,
and
so Jews are what, 15 million people, right?
something like that.
25% Nobel Prizes. and something.
26%.
Thank you. So you're a physicist, I'm not,
Yeah.
just a doctor, why?
So I asked the question, why is are Jews represented disproportionately among Nobel Prize winners in physics? And the first answer is the wrong answer. First answer is, wow, aren't we smart? Because the population of Jews in the general Earth's population is 0.1% versus 26%. That doesn't make sense, right? The only explanation appears to be that we're smarter than everybody else. Now, that may be true.
May just be all the mothers.
Saying two minutes, you got 95, where's the other 5
The comparison between the percentage of Nobel Prize winners in physics and the percentage of Jews in the population is a very wrong comparison. You should be comparing the number of Jews who are scientists as the denominator of that fraction. And so there are no statistics on this, but my own experience in 90 years of knowing physicists is maybe a quarter of all of physicists I know are Jews. So if you compare 26% with a quarter, that's not disproportionate. So you have to use the right denominator. Am I right?
No, you're not right.
I'm not right?
No, because how'd they get to be physicists in the first place?
Well, that's another question.
That's
So
the
why, so that's another
It's a
question, I don't have the answer to. Why are Jewish people disproportionately attracted to physics? Or the law?
Or good at it, or who, whatever.
I think we are smarter than other people, but we're not supposed to.
There we go.
Okay, we have a question from Mike
Right.
Klinghoffer.
What do we got there?
You wanna read
Mike,
it?
yes, from Mike Klinghoffer. Oh, wait, it went away. Hold on.
Mike, you
No,
wanna
no, I got it.
hold it? Oh, there it is.
Life on other planets, does science believe it's possible, and does Judaism spelled wrong, and I can say that because that is my darling husband.
So why don't you ask me an easy question, Mike? I mean, we're friends. I can't answer this. I can tell you that, I'm gonna take a stab at it. I can tell you that life on other planets, see, people have been talking about this for decades and centuries. And I think the opinion of a lot of people who thought about this, and we have programs attempting to detect life on other planets. They say that we know that, here are the facts. We live in a galaxy of about 11 billion stars. And we have been able to determine that there are about 11 billion galaxies. So 11 billion times 11 billion, you do that's 10 to
Need the
the, that's
mathematician.
10 to the 20,
Yeah.
am I right, 10 to the 22? So there are 10 to the 22 stars in the visible universe. And so the question is then becomes this statistical one. How many of those stars have planets? And how many of those planets have life? And no one knows the answer, but they make guesses. So if you assume that an infinitesimal number of stars have planets, and an even smaller number, a double infinitesimal of planets have life on them, then you've got a very small statistic applied to a very large number. And so the argument would be something like this: oh, there has to be life. That's not proof. In fact, Judaism says one example is not proof. So this is not even one example. This is an assumption. Now, when I was a kid, I read science fiction, and I always wanted to believe that there are other people out there and that we'd be visited. Some people believe we've already been visited. I'm not one of them. But I think I'm fairly rational. And my hope is that there's life out there. Whether we will connect it or with them or not, that's another infinitesimal. So there are a lot of infinitesimals multiplied together, making still smaller and smaller numbers and smaller probabilities. But the probability that they could contact us, that's another infinitesimal. So there's a project called SETI, Search for Extraterrestrial Intelligence. It's funded by some wealthy people on the West Coast, and they've been pointing their radio telescopes in different directions and hoping to hear a signal of some intelligence. Or the amount of energy it would take to send a signal over interstellar or intergalactic space is enormous. That means it would have to be a very sophisticated society that had learned how to convert energy into electromagnetic signals, and they would have to come up with a method of an intelligent method that we could decipher. The chances of all of this are very, very small, and I want to believe that someday it'll happen. But that's a long answer to Mike's question. The second part of his question is even harder. Does Judaism believe life is possible? I think Judaism believes life is wonderful. And that l'chaim, we say l'chaim, we love life. And whether Judaism believes that life is possible on other planets, I haven't the foggiest idea what Judaism. I'd love to ask Dan what Judaism believes with regard to life on other planets, but I'm afraid he'll come up with something similar to what I said. But
I just wonder if life on other planets does not look anything like us, you know, this sort of humanoid sort of a model. Whether that then runs into this idea of, you know, in the image of God, you know what I mean?
Oh.
What image, but that's if you're being, you know, very, you know, really being literal, you know, because, you know the way you said that you reconciled science and religion in the sense of this dance of the spirit of one, and you said
Yeah,
sort of the letter and. the
yes,
inspirations.
I feel, I live very comfortably as a Jew and as a scientist, and I don't see any disparity between them. They're different sorts of experiences, different sorts of thinking, and they don't conflict in my book at all.
Or maybe we're on sort of a continuum in that as technology advances, it makes what looked mystical, now we know sort of what's behind the curtain. You know, and it's still, even if you know how a magic trick is done, sometimes you just go like, "Ah, that's amazing,
Hmm.
you know? It doesn't take the wonder away knowing how something happened, and then you just sort of gone on this line from, we saw the event without understanding of it. And as technology and the ability, telescopes and particle colliders, as these things came into being, now you can see the event and understand the science behind it, but the wonder is still there.
So you mentioned the word
Yeah.
magic, and I'd like to tell you that
I got it
I
from
think.
you, thank you very much.
Yeah, that was beautifully said.
Well said.
That was amazing.
I got the smart people.
So magic is a wonderful word. I apply it to science and to religion. I think it's magical to believe in a supreme being that presents ideal behavior that we can aspire to. I think that's a magical idea. I think the invention of religion is a kind of universal thing. It arose in different parts of the world at different times in history from different kinds of people and different flavors. Science is magical too, because Einstein said, other people have said the same thing. The fact that mathematics, which is purely in our heads, has nothing to do with reality, can describe reality is magic, is extraordinary.
Why did you ask your mathematician?
So maybe a mathematician would like to chime in here.
What do you think?
Every math class I ever took, every day, with that particular hour, was being at a magic show.
Ah,
That's just the beginning of it. I would
yeah,
just sit
yeah.
there, just
So
saw
why don't you
magic.
tell us more about what you do in mathematics and how you think it's magic?
It started in ninth grade where, when you're solving equations, set of equations with three unknowns, you could do it by matrices.
Right,
Rather than, you know, you add them together and
Right.
drop some variables out until you get it. And there was no reason why this could work. And it wasn't logical or anything, but I had been to a magic show and it worked. And that was mathematics. They didn't prove this or anything. I remember, I was asked, in freshman, in elementary algebra, 10th grade or ninth grade, to solve a quadratic equation using the quadratic formula. I said, this isn't, this is math, I don't have to memorize an equation. I mean, that's like in history, you have to memorize dates and generals and that kind of stuff. So I said, so what am I gonna do? I didn't memorize it. So I set up, the equation in terms of A, B, C coefficients and solved it. And then got the formula, and I said, oh, I can sort of do some mathematics here. But, I mean, ax squared plus bx plus c was
Right.
0, and I solved for x. I got the formula.
right.
So it's, you know, it's on one hand being the logician and working from the axioms and the principles, on the other hand, magic, what was the two sides.
Yeah.
What happened while I was teaching at the University of Maryland, I found out that the calculus 2 students really didn't know what a first derivative was or a second derivative or a point of inflection. They were plugging numbers into equations.
So there was sort of a lack of understanding
Yeah,
of what, they
and
knew how to do it, but they didn't know why they were doing it.
Yeah, they really didn't know exactly what it was all about.
But you can't do that in science generally, right? You have to know not how to do something, but why you're doing it, right?
Well, I
Maybe
think
not.
you wanna, use your brain to try to understand.
Can we have another?
We have another guest?
No,
Oh,
gentleman who.
Oh, you said 8 o'clock?
Yeah.
Wow, he's here at 7. So, there's no reason on earth why the stuff in our head should describe the external universe. There's no reason on earth that that should be, yet it does, some of it does. Some of, F equals MA equals MC squared. How come that works? It's a gift. It's a gift from God, maybe, that should be. In fact, someone, Eugene Wigner said, it is the unreasonable effectiveness of mathematics and in describing the external physical reality that is a gift. It's a gift. You shouldn't assume that it would work, but some of it works in some cases.
Well, the other thing you said that really struck me is with religion, you have to have faith and you have to accept things that don't make sense. In University of Maryland, they did the fabulous clock experiment. They started 2 atomic clocks, kept one on the ground, and took the other one up to 30,000 feet, flew it around, and when they landed, clocks were different times, exactly as you would predict by general relativity. And it doesn't make any sense that time is not just time. But you have to accept that it's not, and it was math
Well, you
that
get the
proved it.
Michelson-Morley
Michelson-Morley
experience, which I always thought was done in Chicago, was actually done at Appliance.
I forget where it was done.
Well,
Is that the mirror thing?
The Michelson-Morley experiment was done in 1890 or something, and nobody could explain it. The result was that the speed of light appeared to be the same for any observer or two people could see the speed of light is the same, even if one was moving and the other one wasn't.
well, one was moving and they were stationed in like an athletic field. That's how short the field was and the power of the measurement. And since the earth is rotating, when you send the light this way, it should take longer because the earth's moving, the receiver is moving away from it.
Yeah.
And then they send it the other way, and you get there faster, because, and it's the same.
It's the same, it's bizarre, it's a very strange result,
Bizarre.
that the speed of light should be the same, no matter whether you're an observer or stationary looking at it. And whether the source of light is moving or stationary, or whether the observer of light is moving or stationary. It's counterintuitive, but that's the key to E equals MC squared. And it's a long story to go from that to E equals MC squared, but trust me, that's where E equals MC squared comes from. And it's a miracle that we could live in a century where mind of man, who just happens to be Jewish, happens to think in Jewish like thoughts, was able to uncover that secret, that the magic of the mind to decipher this experiment was enormous breakthrough.
With that kind of experiment, you get light didn't need a medium to travel through, so the whole ether, the theory of traveling
Yeah,
through the ether.
there was a theory that at the time that there had to be a medium that allowed light to propagate through interstellar space. They called it the ether, ETHER, not the stuff that the medical. Anyway, that experiment killed the idea of the ether. But it also opened up new kinds of thought patterns, because in fact, one of the explanations of the Michelson-Morley experiment that showed that the speed of light was independent of the source of the observer was that the source of light moving in a certain direction, the distance in that frame of reference as viewed from a stationary frame of reference shortened. And Einstein figured out how to explain that, and it also has to do with the speed of light being constant. It's very counterintuitive. It's very hard to understand, even among physicists, believe me. And then general relativity, 10 years later, he sweated bullets for 10 years. But when I give talks on relativity, I always quote him. He said, "I'm not smarter than anyone else. I just stay with the problem longer." And I love that because young people have to know that you don't have to be a genius, to do something interesting or good or earth changing, life changing, history changing. You just have to stick with it. And that's been something I followed my whole. I'm not smarter than anyone else. I just work harder. Good thing for young people to know.
So we do have another question in the chat, which is,
What is it?
is AI,
Oh, that's a really good question.
AI Jewish thinking? Well, we can say.
Listen, we
is
have
AI
two good
Jewish?
questions from a
Yeah.
really smart guy, who happens
Really
to be our husband.
Who can't spell.
So I don't know the answer to that, but we have an expert on AI in our congregation, and his name is Josh Grunstein. He's the son of David Grunstein, one of our congregants, and he gave a talk on AI. And I don't know, I would like to ask him
We'll have
whether
to
he
ask
thinks
him.
that he's gonna give another talk here in this series of science and religion. As his father is gonna give a talk in September,
September 12th on the
September,
Mondays.
in the science and religion series. And he's a brilliant lawyer who, his hobby is studying and understanding, Maimonides. He's an expert on, at a rabbinical level of understanding, according to Dan. So he's gonna give another talk about Maimonides, and I urge you to attend. It'll be hybrid, both in person and online. I guarantee you'll find it interesting. So other questions? How did I get to this?
How did you get to this?
What
brought you
a
to this
great
book?
question. So when I was a teenager, I read a book called The Universe of Dr. Einstein by Lincoln Barnett. And it was a description of Einstein's theories of relativities for the common man, for the layman. And the introduction, the preface was written by Albert Einstein, and he said, "I approve this book, and everything he says in it is accurate and reflects the proper understanding of relativity." So I think I was 14 or 15, and that book stayed with me. And then when I went to college, I met this Danish Hoffman, and I learned relativity from him, and it's always been an interest of mine. I think that was the reason I went into physics. I thought it was such a beautiful theory. And it's elegant. There's something special about it. Maybe Jewish. So, any other questions?
I was just curious, a little weird, but were you a fan of Star Trek back in the day?
Not really. I read science fiction as a kid, and I loved it. But I was able to compartmentalize my love of science fiction with my love of science fact. And I don't read science fiction anymore, but I know there's some good science fiction movies. I know you're a big fan. You and Mike are both big fans of science fiction. What's your favorite?
Oh, God, back in the day, I was a huge Star Trek fan, and then Star Wars came along, but they're really not about science so much. Star Trek, I think, was truly about, that we could be better, that in the future, we would be better people, we would be more tolerant, we would be better and go off on a big adventure, although if you look at it
religion.
now.
That's religion.
So you could argue it did have that quasi-religious, I thought of it more as social justice.
Oh,
But it was
that's
exciting to me as a kid because Leonard Nimoy, Mr. Spock, was Jewish.
Mhm.
So, it was fun to see somebody on TV and go, I have something in common with them.
so what's your favorite
Science fiction author?
science fiction?
Ooh,
Isaac Asimov?
No, I read all sorts of silly things. So right now I'm reading all the Expanse books.
So
And they're
I'm
more socio-political.
Isaac Asimov and I were friendly, and he wrote a blurb for one of the books on the back cover of my book, and it helped sell a lot of copies of that book.
Always good.
He was a real character, and when we would have lunch, and he would tell me, he says, "I write a book a month."
Ah,
because I don't, I could sit at most writers hate writing, they love having written. He said, I love the process of writing. And he says, I can sit in a room with no windows at a typewriter for 12 hours a day and write continuously for 12 hours. He was very fluent. He wrote books
Amazing.
on the Bible and Shakespeare, on mathematics and physics, chemistry. He wrote about 300 or 400 books. And he said he could knock out a book in a month.
ah,
And he was also a little bit strange, but he took me to a group, there was a club of science fiction writers called the Trapdoor Spider Club. Now, it turns out that the trapdoor spider is one that eats its mate after intercourse. So I don't know why they use that title for the club, but they were all extremely strange characters. And he took me to a meeting there and and he said, don't sit next to that guy. Don't sit next to, it was really funny. Long time, long time.
We have another question in the chat.
Yeah,
How does the theory of relativity relate to?
who asked that? Thank you, Jody.
Yeah, George.
So I'd like to tell you that it does, but I'm afraid that I can't think of how it does. Except that it enriches the intellectual vocabulary, the intellectual ideas of the world, and it's, as I said in that last slide, it's,
No, wait a minute, don't you have to, for GPS?
oh yeah, I forgot that, sorry.
Yes.
So the GPS, so if you have an iPhone and you have GPS, it communicates with the satellites that's a couple of 100 miles, several satellites that are a couple of 100 miles above us in orbit around the Earth. Now, because it's in a different gravitational field, that's one effect of general relativity on the way time passes in a different gravitational field. And because it's moving very fast, that's an effect on time from special relativity. So there are two directions to the GPS due to special and general relativity. Otherwise, these you wouldn't. These wouldn't. Your position on Earth, as determined by your GPS, would not be accurate. It
I'd have
would-
missed the talk tonight,
Yeah,
which we almost did.
right. How come I forget? The most important practical result of relativity, yeah. So, I'm happy to hear more questions. The stranger, the better.
We're looking for strange questions always, aren't we? I wonder if sometimes though that, your own horizons open up, you go to a lecture, you listen to something, and even if you struggle to understand what's going on, your mind now has a better understanding of what a mind can do. You know what I mean? It's almost like, before you can invent something, you have to understand that things can be invented. You know what I mean? So, the act of studying someone else's creativity helps you see what's possible.
Yes, I think that's right.
It certainly couldn't hurt.
They say, mind stretching minds.
Yeah.
And showing that strange things, unusual things, fantastic things can be accomplished by the human mind. with
Right.
Diligence and perseverance and perspiration. Somebody said inspiration is for amateurs, but perspiration is for professionals.
Well, it's
I
good
like-
for everybody.
I like that.
Certainly during
Yeah,
August.
I like that though.
All right,
Well, before we kind of wrap up, so as this program is going to move forward, so we will be back on September 12th, as Steve had mentioned. David Grunstein is going to talk about Maimonides. He spoke about Maimonides before. It was really successful, and I think you guys would all really enjoy it. So look out for those e-blasts. But I wanted to open up to everyone. Are there topics you would love to see? Is there something that you're passionate about, that you want to hear about or learn about or don't know a lot about? Or think about the aspect of the interplay between science and religion, anything at all?
So we're trying to find
Right, so
topics.
look for ideas. for
Any
next-
topic that
Here.
science addresses
Mhm.
can be addressed
Right,
by Dan and rabbinical literature. So we've had one on, oh, somebody said, what about sex? We should have a sexologist here, speak about sex from the modern scientific point of view, and Dan could talk about sex in the Bible. There's plenty of that, so that might be a nice topic. The problem is finding a speaker. uh, Sex, we thought about economics and finance.
yeah,
That's a very rich topic. We need an economist.
and it's a contentious one, I think, for Jews, because we're always struggling with that. With certain stereotypes in that area as well.
That's
Right.
true. That's true.
And Harry Truman said that he wanted a one-armed economist because all the economists were giving him advice on the one hand and on the other hand. And that's Jewish. That's so Jewish,
That little Jody Mark
So there another.
raised her hand.
Oh, I think you can you unmute, or do I need to unmute you? Oh, I did, thank you. Okay, did that? No, it's telling me that I can ask you, okay. Did I get the right person? No. No, sorry,
You could
I
put,
got you now,
hello?
hi,
Yeah.
Am I
Yeah.
unmuted?
yes.
Yeah,
you're
now we can
unmuted.
hear
Yeah,
you.
I'd be curious to hear
Ask me a question.
discussion. Yeah, I'd be curious to hear some investigation into spirituality, science, and creativity, about artistic
Great topic.
creativity. The-
Yeah. I
The
think
need to
both of
create not just thought and theory, but also physical, objects, and seeing the world through creativity, artistic creativity.
Well, I think that's a great topic for religion and for science because it
Mhm.
exists in both places. In my mind, yes. Great suggestion, thank you.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of ways to approach that too, as you said, from fine arts as well as performing arts.
Right,
Yeah.
thank you.
Thank you. So did you have a question? No.
Okay.
I like to see certain things that are in the Bible, to see scientific potential, or, possible scientific explanations for certain things that happened in the
The
Bible.
Red Sea parting,
And
yeah.
all of those things, because whenever whenever you make a movie, someone has to sit there and figure out the stagecraft. They've got to figure out, I mean, even CGI today, somebody's still gotta program that. So someone's gotta figure out how to do it, but back in the old days, they literally had to figure out how to physically engineer a look. So I'm sure science could do it at least as well as, the prop masters.
That'd be
I have
interesting.
an idea for a session.
So-
What about, the science of nutrition versus the
Oh,
culture?
we have a nutritionist in the congregate, Ann Silver,
Dietitian,
a dietitian, was she dietitian, nutrition?
no, there's a difference, remember?
Oh, okay. No, I don't remember. I'm 90 years old. She gave a talk about nutrition.
We did a talk, she gave a talk about nutrition, but she also gave a really fun. We had a fun discussion about lab-grown meat.
That
Whether
was another one,
it
right?
would be considered kosher or not, and, ethical.
Turns out Dan
Dan
really
wrote a paper about this, it
So he
was a
was-
really fun talk.
He really had
Yeah.
a good time with it.
Yeah.
Yeah, but any topic is worth discussing from a scientific or religious point of view.
Well, it would be nice to have a Zoom archive of
Yeah,
people that missed.
this is being recorded, by
I
the
know,
way.
but people who missed
Okay.
it could.
So,
Yeah, that's a
the
good idea.
parting of the Red Sea,
Understand about that, but
is-
it's
the
possible.
parting
Yeah,
of the
that's
Red
a
Sea
good
is
idea.
either a miracle or some kind of scientific explanation for it. I don't like the idea of trying to explain the parting of the Red Sea through science. First of all, I'm not even sure I believe it happened, but let's say it's a legend or a myth or a fairy tale or poetry. And in fact, I like to think that science is about facts and religion is about poetry. I think a lot of the beliefs of religion can be thought of as poetic. And that's one way I explain science and religion to myself, and I feel comfortable thinking about it that way.
I think it's fun though to apply analysis to sort of everything, because, you know, you can take something apart and still be very excited. I mean, you know, often, you know, if I'm reading something, I like to analyze, well, how am I feeling? How did that sentence work? And then you break it down and you realize that depending upon how certain authors work, there's a rhythm and there's a cadence, you know, and a way of varying sentence lengths and all kinds of things that, these are technical things, but they create this emotional response. So the more I think about this, it becomes very difficult to separate techniques and sort of very concrete things from intangible. You know, that here's a technical thing going on, but there's an emotional response.
So I think these emotional responses are somehow part of our lives in that we appreciate stories.
Yes.
And religion offers us stories, and science offers us stories. So we resonate with stories, you know, a narrative about something or a series of events. And that's why literature can have such power to attract and hold our attention. And science is the same thing. I mean, relativity is a story. It's a very long story. It's a complicated story, but it's a beautiful story.
Well, I think that may be a perfect place
That's a
to.
perfect.
Yeah,
Thank you
okay.
so much.
Thank you for coming. My sister and my brother were supposed to come, but they
Well,
probably
they missed
had
it.
enough of me, so.
Anyway, hopefully I'll see all of you back September 12th. When we're gonna be discussing Maimonides with David Grunstein. And, you know, if you have any ideas or thoughts, you can always send messages, I guess, through the rabbi or Shelley. This has been such a great program. I hope you've all enjoyed this evening. So
Thanks,
wish you all a good night.
thanks for
Yeah,
coming.
yeah.
So now you're gonna
I think I end.
end this, so then I have to help you.
That's nice.